The Navy's most advanced warship, worth billions, suddenly stopped moving. Its powerful engine, the heart of the ship, just went dead in the middle of the ocean. Dozens of world-class engineers tried for weeks to fix it, but no one could figure out what was wrong. The ship, once a symbol of power, floated uselessly in silence. Everyone had given up until the admiral called an old Navy veteran no one had heard of in years. What happened next shocked them all. The sea was calm, but the air around the ship crackled with tension. The NSS Valiant, the Navy's most advanced and expensive warship, floated motionless in the open ocean, its enormous engine completely silent. For a ship built to dominate the waves with unmatched power and precision, this was an unthinkable failure. The pride of the fleet had become a lifeless steel giant in the water. Over the past 3 weeks, teams of elite engineers had been flown in from around the world. Experts in naval propulsion, electrical systems, digital diagnostics, and every branch of engineering had taken their turn. They examined every system, ran thousands of tests, and stripped down the core of the engine, looking for the problem. And yet, no one could explain why the ship wouldn't run. No warnings had been triggered, no damage was visible. Every report said the same thing: nothing was wrong, and still the ship would not move. The mood among the crew turned from stress to dread. How could something so powerful just stop? Whispers began to spread. Some joked that the ship was cursed. Others quietly wondered if they had pushed technology too far. The Valiant wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol of the Navy's strength. Its failure had become a national embarrassment. Admiral Pierce stood on the bridge, staring out at the endless sea as the sun dipped low on the horizon. He looked tired, his uniform perfectly pressed as always, but his face lined with the weight of impossible decisions. He had personally approved the design of the Valiant, had overseen its first mission, and now, here it was dead in the water. The last engineer had just left his office, shaking his head. "I'm sorry, Admiral. We've tried everything. We'll need to dismantle the engine entirely, piece by piece. It could take months." Pierce didn't respond immediately. He nodded, gave a polite thank you, and turned back toward the glass. The ocean didn't care about pride, progress, or perfection. It just kept moving. The Admiral let out a long breath and said quietly, more to himself than anyone else, "Then, it's time to call Hale." The room went silent. Captain Morris, standing nearby, raised an eyebrow. "Thomas Hale, you can't be serious, sir. He retired almost 10 years ago." "I know," Pierce said, "and that's exactly why we need him." Maurice hesitated. "But, sir, he's just one man. We've had full teams here, working non-stop. No offense, but what could Halley possibly do that they haven't already tried?" The Admiral turned. His voice wasn't angry, it was steady, but sharper than steel. "When you've watched someone bring a burning engine back to life with nothing but his hands, when you've seen him feel the fault before the tools can find it, you stop asking what he can do, you just call him." There was a pause. Then Morris nodded, and the call was made. Hundreds of miles away, Thomas Hale was sitting quietly in a small workshop, deep in the countryside. He wasn't watching the news, didn't check the updates, didn't care about the drama happening aboard the Valiant. His world was quiet. He spent his days fixing old tractors, restoring antique motors, and drinking black coffee in silence. When the call came in from the Admiral's office, he didn't answer right away. He let it ring. Then he sighed, rubbed his worn hands together, and picked up. The voice on the other end was formal, polite, but urgent. "Mr. Hale, Admiral Pierce has personally requested your presence aboard the Valiant. The ship is suffering from a critical engine failure. No one's been able to fix it." There was a pause. "He says the ship needs you." For a long moment Hale said nothing. He looked at the old photos on his warship's engines, sailors he had trained. Memories flickered. Finally he said, "I'll come. Not for the Admiral, not for the Navy, for the ship." When Thomas Hale stepped off the chopper and onto the deck of the Valiant, there were no fanfares or salutes. Just a few puzzled looks and whispered comments among the crew. "That's him, the guy they called in to fix this." He didn't look like a hero. He wore a plain Navy jacket, a tool belt with just a few worn tools, and carried a small notebook in his hand. His gray hair was pulled back and his boots were scuffed. But his eyes were sharp, calm, and searching. The kind of eyes that had seen machines break in 100 different ways, and had always found a way to bring them back. Admiral Pierce met him at the entrance to the engine room. No handshake, no ceremony, just a quiet moment of respect between two old sailors. "Thank you for coming," Tom Pierce said. "It's bad down there." Hale nodded once. "Let me see her." The engine room was a steel cathedral of silence. Once, it had been the loudest, most alive place on the ship. Now it felt like a grave. Lights blinked dimly. Screens showed perfect data but no life. Hale walked in and said nothing. He moved slowly, placing his hand on the cold steel panels as he passed. He closed his eyes and just listened, not to the machines, but to the space itself. After a few minutes he said softly, "Clear the room." "Excuse me," an officer said. "I need the room. Alone. 1 hour." The Admiral gave the order. The room emptied. Hale remained, walking among the silent pipes and lifeless parts, like a man listening for a heartbeat buried deep inside a machine no one else could understand. Outside, the crew waited. Some were hopeful, others were amused. Many were just confused. What's he going to do in there? Someone muttered. Meditate the engine back to life. But Admiral Pierce didn't speak. He just watched the clock. And inside that silent room, a single man listened to the ship, waiting for it to speak back. Inside the engine room, Thomas Hale moved with a kind of quiet patience that felt completely out of place in a space designed for speed and power. He didn't rush. He didn't take out fancy diagnostic tools. He simply walked, touched, listened. The walls of the room were thick, the air cool and heavy with the scent of oil and metal. Rows of valves, massive turbines, and control panels loomed around him like silent giants. This place used to pulse with energy. Hale could still remember the sound from years ago when he was part of the team that helped design and test the early systems. He had run his hands across these same surfaces when they were fresh, new, full of promise. But now they were too quiet, not broken, just not speaking. That was the strange part. It wasn't as though something had snapped or burned out. It was more like the engine had decided to shut down, as if it were refusing to work. That's what the others couldn't understand. Machines don't make choices unless someone gave them the ability to. He crouched down next to the lower conduits and pulled out a small flashlight. Not a high-tech scanner, just a simple light to help him see inside the dark corners of the ship's heart. He noticed little things the others had missed. A slight discoloration on a pipe, a wire that was perfectly placed, but had a faint scorch mark near the base, a bolt that felt looser than it should, but still within the safety tolerance. None of it screamed problem, but all of it whispered something wasn't right. And Hale was the kind of man who listened to whispers. He took out a small notebook, the leather cracked and the pages filled with faded ink, and jotted a few notes. Then he stood and placed his hand on the main control panel. It was cool, too cool. The engine wasn't even trying to start anymore, like it had given up. Outside the engine room, the mood among the crew was shifting. The longer Hale stayed silent inside, the more opinions began to form. Some of the younger officers rolled their eyes. "This is a waste of time," one of them muttered. "He's probably just walking in circles, taking a nap." Others were more respectful, even curious. Chief Engineer Raina Cole, who had been leading the failed repair efforts, stood near the door with arms crossed. She wasn't against Hale being there, but she didn't like being sidelined either. "Whatever he finds, I want to see it with my own eyes," she told the Admiral. Pierce nodded but said nothing. He'd seen this before. Not just with Hale but with many others over his long career. People always doubted the quiet ones until the moment they proved you wrong. Back inside, Hale was beneath the main core now, lying flat on his back, looking up at the guts of the engine. He ran his fingers along a small panel that had been untouched during previous inspections. The engineers had likely passed it over because, on the surface, it seemed unrelated to the failure. But Hale had seen systems like this enough to know that sometimes it wasn't the obvious parts that broke things, it was the silent ones that went unnoticed. His fingers found a small bolt, tucked in behind a cooling valve. It wasn't just loose, it was wrong. It had been replaced with a newer part. It fit, but it didn't belong. And that one detail told Hale everything he needed to know. He sat up slowly and smiled, just a little. It was the kind of smile that said, "There you are." He stood and wiped his hands on a cloth from his belt and turned toward the exit. Exactly 1 hour had passed since he entered the room. When the doors opened and he stepped out, the crew stared. Some leaned in, expecting a dramatic report. Others looked away, trying not to show how little faith they'd had. Admiral Pierce stepped forward. "Well," he asked. Hale shrugged, calm as ever. "There's nothing wrong with the engine," he said. "It's confused." That statement made several officers exchange glances. Confused. Engines didn't get confused. Machines weren't emotional. But the Admiral didn't react. He waited. Hale continued. "One of the replacement parts, some minor thing near the cooling valve, matched the original system. It's just enough to cause a miscommunication between systems, not a failure. Just a disagreement. The computer's trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist, and in doing so, it's locking itself out." Chief Engineer Cole stepped forward, trying to understand. "But we ran diagnostics on every system. That bolt doesn't even register as part of the main function chain." Hale gave a small nod. "That's why you missed it. It's not the part, it's the response. One small thing out of place caused a chain reaction. The machine can't trust its own readings anymore. It's like if you see a shadow that shouldn't be there, you freeze. You don't know if it's a threat or just your imagination." The ship did the same thing. It froze. For a few seconds, no one said anything. Then Admiral Pierce spoke. "Can you fix it?" Hale didn't hesitate. "Yes, I already did." That got everyone's attention. "What do you mean?" Cole asked. Hale pulled the wrench from his belt and held it up. "I tightened the bolt, realigned the plate, gave the machine what it was, missed confidence." A murmur passed through the crew. Pierce smiled. "Just a little, let's see." Then they returned to the engine room. Hale gave a simple nod. "Start her up." A few officers hesitated, still unsure, but Cole gave the signal. The system hummed, lights flickered, and then boom. The engine roared to life, not a weak shuffle, but a deep, healthy rumble that vibrated through the entire floor. Like a sleeping, the giant awakening from a long nap. Cheers broke out. Some crew members laughed, others clapped. Cole stared at the monitors, stunned. Everything was green, everything was right. Hale stood quietly in the corner, just watching. He didn't cheer, he didn't boast. He just watched the ship breathe again. Admiral Pierce stepped beside him. You never failed to surprise me, Tom. Hale didn't look away. It's not about surprise, he said. It's about listening. And somewhere deep within the massive steel heart of the Valiant, a machine once again knew what it was. Whole, alive, and understood. The Valiant moved again, cutting through the waves with grace and force. Its powerful engine alive and steady beneath the steel decks. The moment the ship had surged forward under its own power, something shifted not just in the metal, but in the hearts of everyone aboard. There was pride again. Relief, and yet, beneath the surface, questions still lingered. For most of the crew, the problem was solved. The engine was fixed, the mission could continue, and Thomas Hale had become an instant legend. People saluted him in the halls, shook his hand with wide eyes, and whispered stories about how he had talked to the ship and brought it back to life. But for Admiral Pierce and Chief Engineer Cole, something didn't sit right. Hale had said the engine wasn't broken, it was confused. A system this advanced didn't confuse itself easily. Something had triggered the problem, and neither of them believed it was just a loose bolt. That evening, the Admiral invited Hale to his private quarters. The room was quiet, old-fashioned, filled with wooden shelves and faded books in odd contrast to the cutting-edge technology of the rest of the ship. Pierce poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of Hale. You sure you don't want a medal? He asked with a faint smile. Hale didn't answer right away. He stared into the dark liquid before lifting the cup. You don't call me for medals, he said. The Admiral nodded slowly. No, I call you when the impossible shows up and the manual has nothing useful to say. There was a long pause between them, a silence that only 2 men with history could share. Finally, Pierce leaned forward. You said something about the engine getting confused, something about a replaced part. What exactly did you mean? Hale set his cup down and folded his hands. The part itself wasn't broken. It was new. It didn't belong to the system. Someone swapped it recently during the last maintenance cycle. Maybe it was just close enough to fit, but not right. The Admiral frowned. Are you saying someone installed the wrong part by mistake? Hale shook his head. Not a mistake. A mistake would have shown more signs. This was deliberate. Someone wanted the engine to glitch but not fail outright. The ship would stall, delay its mission, waste time, and everyone would blame it on a minor malfunction. The Admiral stiffened. Sabotage, subtle sabotage, Hale said. Not enough to cause disaster. Just enough to interrupt operations and shake confidence. And if you hadn't called me, it might have stayed offline for months. Pierce stood and began to pace slowly. The Valiant wasn't just a ship, it was a strategic weapon, capable of controlling entire regions of sea with its advanced systems. Delays could mean lost opportunities, failed operations, or worse. This ship hasn't left a secured dock without a full clearance check. No unauthorized personnel, no unsupervised maintenance. He turned to Hale. How would someone even get on board to plant something like that? Hale leaned back in his chair. They didn't need to. All it takes is one person in the right uniform with the right access. Someone who knows no one would question them. Pierce rubbed his forehead. We've had hundreds of techs cycle through this ship during the last year. Contractors, naval engineers, systems specialists. Hale gave a dry smile. Then I'd start with the ones who didn't stay long. The Admiral didn't respond, but his eyes darkened. He tapped a button on the desk and quietly ordered a full background recheck on every technician who had worked on the Valiant in the last 6 months. When the call ended, he sat back down. And you, Tom, what are you going to do now that you've saved the Navy again? Hale's eyes twinkled, but there was something serious behind them. I'll stay on the ship just a little longer. Why? Because I think the engine isn't the only part of this ship that's been tampered with. The next morning, Hale showed up in the engine room before sunrise. He didn't announce himself, didn't ask for permission. He simply started inspecting things again. This time, he wasn't looking for mechanical problems. He was hunting for patterns. He traced wiring paths, reviewed installation logs, and pulled up archived diagnostic reports that no one had looked at in weeks. Chief Engineer Cole eventually joined him, her pride still a little bruised, but her curiosity stronger than her ego. You really think someone messed with more than just that bolt? She asked. Yes, Haley replied simply. And I think they expected the problem to spread. Together, they went over the backup generator systems, the hydraulic pressure monitors, and the automated coolant valves. The deeper they looked, the more they found small irregularities, nothing dangerous on their own, but just enough to throw the system off balance if triggered in sequence. Cole leaned back, stunned. This was a web. A slow, creeping failure. That would have looked like wear and tear. Hale nodded. It would have led to a full systems failure over time. No explosions, just silence. The ship would become unreliable. That's the worst kind of failure. Cole looked at him, her respect growing. You've seen this before, haven't you? Hale gave a quiet nod. Once a long time ago on a research ship, it sank before we figured it out. The weight of his words hung in the air. Outside the engine room, the Valiant cruised forward, without a hitch. Her power restored, her mission back on track. But deep inside, Hale and Cole now understood that someone, somewhere, wanted this ship to fail quietly and, maybe permanently. As Halen walked back to his quarters, the ship's steel floor echoed beneath his boots. He paused near a vent shaft and listened, not to the wind or the hum of the systems, but for something else, a feeling, a whisper in the metal. The ship was still speaking to him, but now, its voice was cautious. And for the first time since he arrived, Thomas Hale realized he was no longer just fixing a machine. He was walking into a trap set by someone who understood these systems almost as well as he did. The sun had begun to set as the Valiant sliced through open waters, golden light bouncing off its steel hull, casting long shadows across the deck. The air was crisp combat inside the ship. Tension rippled beneath the surface. Admiral Pierce, Hale and Chief Engineer Cole had spent the last 2 days quietly following leads, tracing every strange irregularity back to its source. Patterns emerged, altered maintenance logs, tiny time gaps during inspections, system updates made by personnel who, on paper, had never been on board. And then there was the name that kept appearing: Lieutenant Commander Rourke, a systems specialist who had worked for 1 month during the ship's final construction phase and disappeared just before launch. His records were clean, too clean. Hale sat alone in the observation deck that evening, watching the sea stretch endlessly in every direction. His face was still, his thoughts loud. He'd found something worse than sabotage. He'd found intent. This wasn't a mission to break, a machine. It was a long game to take the Valiant from within, to turn the Navy's pride into its silent failure. And whoever was behind it knew just how to do it, not with a bomb, not with a gun, but with misplaced trust in invisible hands. That night, alarms rang. Not red alert loud, but sharp enough to get attention. Power dipped slightly. Not an outage, just a hesitation. Like the ship had blinked, Hale and Cole rushed to the engine room. Everything looked fine, but readings were off. A secondary system had activated itself without command. Hale moved fast, checking diagnostics. He traced the command path and froze. "Someone's in the system," he said, "right now." Cole's fingers flew across her control panel. "But no one's accessed it physically. This has to be remote." Hale narrowed his eyes. Only someone who helped build the software could do this. Without another word, he sprinted toward the central server room. Pierce met him halfway, already briefed. "We think someone patched in from an external satellite channel. Encrypted. They're testing," Hale said grimly, "seeing if the ship will obey new instructions." In the server room, the lights were dim. Hale opened a locked panel, something only a handful of engineers even knew existed. Inside, nestled behind standard hardware, was a small black module. It hummed, faintly, illegal, unregistered, surgically wired into the mainframe. Hale's voice was low. "This is it, a ghost node, built to override commands, invisible to surface diagnostics." Cole stared at it, stunned. This isn't just sabotage, it's infiltration. They could control the entire ship from the outside if this stayed hidden. Hale nodded, and no one would know until it was too late. Pierce gave the order to disable all remote access links and lock down internal systems. But it wasn't enough. Whoever was controlling the ghost node had realized they were found, and they pushed back. The Valiant began acting on its own. Autocorrection protocols kicked in. Doors sealed without commands. Navigation adjusted slightly. It was small at first, subtle. Hale worked fast, pulling open the module. "They're trying to force a full reboot," he said. "If that happens, they take over. We lose everything." Cole handed him a toolkit. "Can you pull it?" He looked up, calm but intense. "If I pull it wrong, it'll trigger a defense protocol. The ship will think it's under attack and shut everything down, including life support." She hesitated. "Then how we don't pull it," Hale said. "We overwrite it." He took out a small drive from his pocket. It was old, scratched, and labeled in faded ink Hale OS manual mode. "This is the original code I helped write years ago, before the systems got layered and politicized. Before it was about appearances." He plugged it into a side port and began typing commands faster than anyone else in the room could follow. Lines of code scrolled. The ship's systems pushed back, confused, trying to resist the old language, but Hale knew the engine like it was part of him. He talked to it, not just with his hands, but with his mind. He didn't fight it. He calmed it, reassured it. "You're not broken," he whispered. "You were built for better than this." Cole watched the data streams realign. The ship's heartbeat, the low hum of power began to steady. Lights flickered back into normalcy. The ghost node tried one last override command and failed. Hale's code had taken root, not by force but by invitation. The ship chose to trust him. Moments later, silence returned. Clean, strong silence. No alarms, no glitches, just peace. Hale stood slowly. "It's done." By morning, the entire module was removed, sealed as evidence. The security team traced the satellite origin back to a rogue facility in the southern sector. and within hours, military intelligence began operations to root out the broader plot. Admiral Pierce stood on the bridge, watching the open ocean ahead, a quiet pride in his stance. "We owe you more than we can say, hey," he said, "not just for fixing the engine, but for listening when no one else could." Hale didn't smile, just gave a soft nod. Ships aren't just machines, they're built with purpose. When you forget that, things fall apart. Cole joined them, tired but relieved. "So what now?" she asked. Hale looked out at the sea, his voice steady. "Now, the Valiant sails forward, and maybe this time they remember who she is." He didn't stay for praise. He packed his small bag, left a few notes behind, and quietly disembarked the next time the ship docked. Just like that, he was gone. No medals, no speeches. Just a name whispered with respect through the Navy corridors. But long after Thomas Hale disappeared into the world again, the Valiant sailed stronger than ever. Her system smooth, her crew alert, her heart beating true, because one man had reminded her what she wasn't, more importantly, reminded everyone that even the most complex machine needs more than parts and programming. It needs someone who listens. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to The Black Struggle for more powerful and emotional stories every week.